So with the latest release of the Active Lives Adult Survey, which was released in March 2018, we're just going to give a short summary over the key trends, key data that's come out of it, and look at it from a GM perspective and across the localities. Okay, so headline results. As you can see, we've got 27.8% inactive, 10.9% fairly active, and 61.4% active. In real numbers, that's 1.36 million people who are active in GM, which is a huge number, but obviously still got almost a third of people that are inactive, so huge gains still to be made. And if we compare that to the previous 12 months, we can see obviously positive trend. There's been a reduction in the inactive, a 2% increase in the amount of people that are active, so that's quite a significant increase statistically. And I think key to this as well is our aims to be the most active region in the country. We've made huge gains, moving from 40th to 28th in terms of active people. So again, quite significant increases, but still some gains to be made in relation to national levels. Okay, so what does this look like across Greater Manchester in the localities? First thing to see is that it's remained fairly stable across all of them. The one area where there's been a significant increase in active people is in Salford, almost 6%, and a significant decrease in inactive people in Stockport. The key insight that we've taken from this is there's still quite a large disparity between the most active and inactive regions. If we look at Wigan and the number of inactive, 32.5%, compared to Stockport, it's almost double. So whilst we are moving in the right direction and we're seeing stability in the survey, there are still, entrenched inequalities that we need to tackle. So just a quick context nationally. When we look to the national picture, we've got a seasonal trends here, and we can see again there's consistency and stability throughout the survey in relation to the previous 12 months, and these small sort of variations that we're seeing in the end of summer in 2017 suggested from contextual sources is higher rainfall, adverse weather conditions, and also largely the effect of Rio 2016, which we know large events affect activity levels and different activities. So really the headline sort of stuff to see that we're seeing so far is that we're seeing stability in the survey and changes being captured. So it's further vindication that Active Lives is working and measuring activity levels accurately. So we're just going to open this up and look at some of the key demographic groups. So first in terms of gender, again we're seeing a positive shift in terms of less inactive, more active, the most significant being for males. They're almost a 2% increase, which is quite significant. And as with the headline data, I think the main trend that we're seeing is a shift from fairly active to active. So positive steps in terms of getting those people to add the intensity to the activities and becoming more active. One of the main aspects still to focus on is that we are still behind the national levels, and the gap between the genders in terms of inactive is still larger compared to the ratio at a national level. So just a few highlights looking across the localities, and we see the top 2 points just reference the following the national trend where there's been decreases in inactivity, increases in activity. One of the main areas where we've seen against this trend is in Oldham, where there's been a decrease in the active and an increase in the inactive. And as we'll see going on, there's certain demographics that this has fallen into other than just gender. An interesting point just to look at is Trafford, whilst being one of the most active areas, still has a huge gender gap. So just reiterating that point of while the trend is positive, the inequalities are still persistent. So still work to be done there. In terms of age, the biggest gains we've seen have been throughout the middle age group, so 35 to 54, 55 to 74, and this does correlate with national levels as well. So we're seeing that stability across Greater Manchester as well as nationally. Where that differs, I think nationally we've seen reduction in the number of young people, so 16 to 34-year-olds being active over the last 12 months. In Greater Manchester we've had a slight increase, so that's a positive step. And in terms of the over 75s, whilst that's remained stable nationally, we have seen a reduction here, so that is something to focus on in terms of trends in terms of age. And again, just some of the key highlights across the localities. I think again, focusing on Oldham, we're seeing that huge decrease in the number of people who are active aged 16 to 34. Interestingly, the middle age groups where we're seeing the biggest increase both nationally and in the GM, we're seeing areas such as Rochdale, which now 35 to 54-year-olds are the most active of any age group. So some key learnings to be had there, and trends that obviously offer some further insight going forward. Looking at social economic groups, and this is 12 months comparison data, and again we're seeing some positivity, remain fairly stable on the whole, but some slight increases in active for the lower social economic groups and also for those in the higher economic groups. So again, good level of stability over the 12 months, which is reflected nationally as well. In the localities, what does this look like? We're seeing people becoming who are more inactive during the middle economic groups in places like Trafford rather than lower social economic groups, so that is sort of going against traditional inequalities. And over time we've seen a decrease in activity in places like Salford for people in those lower social economic groups. So positive steps being made, but there still is obviously inequalities existing. In terms of disability, again, stayed fairly stable. I think the biggest gains are to be had in those becoming active who are a long-term disability, seeing almost 1.5% increase, which is quite significant. I think the key thing though is that in terms of the inactive, you're twice as likely still to be inactive if you have a long-term disability, so still persistent inequalities. And again, just across the localities, we're just seeing some slight trends in terms of smaller gaps in activity across Manchester, Stockport and Tameside, and the largest across Trafford, Salford and Wigan. Okay, final one in terms of ethnicity. Again, the two key facts really to see here are, whilst it's remained stable, Chinese residents have become 12.5% more active, and there's been significant decreases in South Asian residents. Okay, so moving on from demographics, now we're going to look at the types of activity that are being reported. So the key thing to notice here is that people who are active do so through a range of activities. So it's that blend and the relationship between different activities that is key in understanding how they work for different demographics. So as we've mentioned before with the age groups, there's been a significant increase in walking for travel and for stuff like adventure sports, which if we go to the next slide, we see those two aspects are being taken up by people in those middle age groups. So the significant increases we're seeing for age are linked to increases in two different activities. In terms of being active at least twice in the last 28 days, again, fairly consistent, no real changes at all, apart from one area in Stockport where there's been almost a 5% increase. So again, just throughout the survey, we're seeing this stability over 12 months, so we're able to be sure that we're capturing change and that it's a reliable source of capturing the activity levels. So moving away from just sort of the data and reflection on activity levels, we're now just going to look at some of the outcomes and how that relates to activity levels. And the three sort of main areas that are being focused on by Sport England is well-being and individual and community development. And this is just some of the metrics they use for measuring that. So in terms of well-being, fairly straightforward in the sense of there's a strong positive correlation between activity levels and self-reported life satisfaction, happiness and worthwhile. So some activity is good, more is better in terms of well-being. In terms of drivers for life satisfaction, those who are a member of a sports club, 35% more likely to have increased life satisfaction. Similarly, those who walk for leisure, 32% increased chance. So again, whilst this isn't a causal link that we can draw, it's very strong association between these types of activities and positive life satisfaction. Self-efficacy, so confidence in their abilities. Again, we're seeing strong correlations between those who are active, 57% increased chance of having higher self-efficacy, and those who volunteered as well, almost 40% increased chance. So again, whilst we're not able to draw causal links at this time, we are able to start seeing over a 12-month trend there's positive links between certain activities being active in itself and things such as volunteering with effects on people's well-being and individual development. So just looking a little bit more in terms of community, social trust, I think a key thing here again is volunteering. So again, strong positive link between those people who are volunteering, feeling that they have the trust of their community, that there's a positive connection between the people they live and work with. And again, we're just starting to see those associations between different activities and different behaviours with positive community well-being. Just looking ahead to further releases, whilst we've only had 6 months data on volunteering, the next release on the 11th of October will have a strong focus on volunteering, where we'll be able to look at 12 months trends, dig down a little bit more into sort of key insights around that sort of activity. Following the turn of the year next year, we'll have a full year's worth of the Children and Young Persons Active Lives survey, so that will have some key insights for that cohort. And just overall on the results of the survey, we've had a positive direction, huge gains in the ranking in GM, which is a big step. We're seeing fairly active moves to active, while inactive is staying stable. So whilst we are seeing a positive move and we're aligning ourselves to the national trend, inequalities are still persistent and there is still a gap to those national levels.